And Madam Chair, we are live.
All right, welcome to another session of Police Advisory Task Force meeting. Shane, did you want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, ma'am, I can. And this commences our 20 meeting. Again, has everyone had a chance to look over the minutes from the previous meeting, the September 23rd, 2020 meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Are the meetings okay as they are?
Yes, the notes are okay.
Okay, awesome. All right, can I have a motion be made that we accept the meetings as they are, the minutes as they are? Okay. Okay, can we have a second of that motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. Okay, the ayes have it. Let the record reflect that the motion been made in second and voted upon to accept meetings from the minutes from the September 23rd, 2020 minutes. Okay, has everyone had a chance to look over the agenda for today?
Yes.
Okay, all right, and I think that there will be a motion to be made that item D is scratched from the agenda today, and it will be reintroduced in our next meeting. If I could, can I have a motion made for that?
So moved.
I will second that motion.
Okay, the motion been made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed say nay. Okay, I'm sorry. All opposed say nay. Okay, let the record reflect that motion been made and seconded to scratch item D from the agenda today. Okay, and with that, Madam Chair, we can begin.
All right, so thank you guys for joining us again today. And we wanted to begin this discussion with item B. We want to revisit the discussion on powers and authorities. Last week, I wanted to know, because I had a concern about powers and authority and who can oversee and help to navigate this committee. So I asked if the county auditor, as opposed to the mayor and commission or the city manager, a chartered officer of some sort, can be the overseer of this committee. And so I believe Sherry was going to do some research and get back to us and tell me what that might look like, because Leanna, my concern is the independence portion of it. I believe that it's going to be a serious conflict of interest if it's over, if the auditor has to go to the city manager and be overseen by the city manager, whereas he's also oversees the police department, and he's the overseer of both of those entities. So I see that to be a conflict of interest, and I'm just trying to make sure that people feel secure with being able to use this body, this agency, and not there to be a conflict of interest. So that is where we're at. Could you give us any feedback on that, Leanna? And also, Sherry, can you tell us what you discovered?
Yeah, so if I may, that's kind of an inherent conflict that sometimes is not necessarily avoidable. I mean, I know from my personal experience here in Tucson, I reported to the city manager. When I say reported, I mean the city manager did not. You can kind of put it in the language maybe that the city manager did not, direct the day-to-day activities or what it is the auditor should or shouldn't be doing. I mean, that's all established by the ordinance, and it's true here in Tucson that the police chief also reports to the city manager, but the chief also reports to the elected officials as well. So if there's issues of conflict between the auditor and the police chief, basically the city manager is kind of like the tiebreaker or the individual that has to make a decision on how to proceed with whatever the issue may be. I get it that that there is that perceived conflict of interest as far as the role of independence. I think that's probably the same for many entities across the country. That whole reporting structure. I mean, I think you may be able to, I don't want to say get around it, but make it very explicit in the ordinance as to what types of conflicts may present themselves and what would happen, or what would occur, or process rather, would need to be put in place if the auditor felt there was a conflict that the manager should not be part of addressing.
Okay. So, the next question would be, everybody else can ask questions as well. But the next question would be, as opposed to that city manager, because they oversee the police department, that's their first priority. And this is an entity that is created to balance things out. We said one of the questions that we want to consider is mediation. So any form of mediation. Is that a part of the Tucson model? Is that a way that some of these disagreements could be hashed out and keep it total separate from causing a conflict of interest?
So the mediation programs are really to mediate the complaints, and not necessarily like a conflict or a conflict of interest between the structures themselves. So the mediation program in, let's say, DC and Minneapolis, they are actual programs within their offices that they run those mediation programs, and they usually use external mediators, because the people that do the mediations have to be trained, right? You have to have trained mediators. It's a skill to do it. I used to do them when I worked for the Attorney General's office before I went to do this other life as the auditor. But it's a skill, and it's looked at very favorably with respect to mediating things that you want to basically create a win-win for both sides, that everybody goes away with something, to at least have the issue resolved. I know in Minneapolis and in DC, those the actual process or mediation programs are within their office. So say I call and want to file a complaint that an officer was rude to me, and in the course of a traffic stop, the officer said whatever, that was rude. I have an issue with that. I get the option to either have the complaint go to mediation, where the officer can go to mediation as well. I mean, basically that's what it is, between the complainant and the officer. Or I can go the other avenue and have the complaint investigated by the Office of Professional Standards or Internal Affairs. So I can have it go either way. You can also do a thing where I think some of these other mediation programs are if the complainant is not satisfied with the outcome of the mediation, the complaints can still go to Internal Affairs to be investigated. Now, there's different things that you want to say aren't eligible for mediation. You would never want to mediate a use of force complaint, or something of a very high magnitude or high profile type of complaint. It's really more for kind of like rudeness, attitude, failure to provide appropriate service, however you categorize those. They can be very effective programs because I almost look at them as kind of educating the community. The community is getting educated on why the officer may have done, A, B, and C before or what the expectations were for the community member. And the officer learns, especially some of the new officers, learn some more life skills on the job as far as communications, how to better communicate with citizens and with members of the community. But the mediation programs themselves are to address complaint, not necessarily mediating conflicts. Does that make sense, or does that clarify it?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. Just want to clarify how that would be used and how it could be used or have been used.
Well, and with respect to the budgetarily, the way we did it, I know in like DC, San Diego also has, San Diego County has a mediation program too. I know that those are programs that are funded within their offices. But because, sometimes lack of resources, definitely you may not have enough to have like full-time mediators working for your office. So you can contract it out. So in Tucson, what we did was our city court system has mediation, outside social service agencies that that do mediations for, barking dog complaints between neighbors or stuff like that, that they actually already have a mediation program in place. And that's what we chose to do here. We contracted like a set fee for each mediation that an outside mediation agency within the community would actually perform those mediations rather than having full mediation staff on file. I mean, on contract or under yourself, as an employee.
Okay. All right. So I want everyone to be able to ask questions. So does anyone want to ask questions before Sherry chime in and try to give us what she discovered?
Mocha, it's Captain Daniel. I just want to say one thing since y'all are talking about mediation. If it helps y'all, we do have a informalized process already built into our complaints and disciplinary actions policy regarding mediation. It's very similar to what Anna just described in the sense, the process sense. However, it's informal. We don't necessarily contract out full-time professional or trained mediators. We do have a similar process in place if y'all wanted to take a look at that at some point, discussing that in the future.
Okay. Thank you. That is something to consider. Did anybody else want to chime in?
I guess I had one question related to who the auditor monitor reports to. We were discussing, Madam Chair, the pros and cons of reporting to the city manager. I guess my question would be, if not the city manager, who would be another option? I guess the mayor.
I'm saying another chartered officer that is capable, that already kind of, like, I'm saying it makes sense to me. The reason why I keep bringing up the county auditor is because it makes sense to me for that person to be a part of this somehow. So when we need to do measurements, the next question on here is like when we need to measure the results, the track, when we need to do certain things, that person is already in the mind state of collecting data and have experience doing that. They're already a part of the government. They're a chartered officer that is somewhat, they work for the government. They work for the county, but they don't work necessarily for, they're not tied to any particular, say, department. They're that's my understanding of it.
Right. So it's a civilian in a sense.
Yeah. So that's why I was recommending the county auditor. They already have one.
I see.
That's a chartered officer. So that's why I felt like they have to work with everybody overall somehow.
Right. I hear you. Thank you.
Mhm. Anybody else?
To that point, this is Stephanie. I'm wondering then the relationship between the county manager and the auditor is such that the auditor reports under, or the auditor for the county, that the auditor reports to the county manager. Is that correct? Or the city manager?
I guess she would be a independent person that's an in-between. I mean, to my understanding, there is some type of committee that was created and the auditor oversees that committee. And so I'm just trying to make sure, my whole thing right here, right now, is to make sure the number one rule that's a part of the 13th principle is that this body is independent and can truly be I would say a middle person between the community and police officers, a safe space to where community members can come to this oversight board, and so officers can feel if they come to this oversight board, it's non-biased, it's fair. There's no conflict.
Okay. Hey, this is Blaine. I was just going to answer Stephanie's question if it's appropriate.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, Stephanie, so the auditor, Mocha's correct that it's a charter officer hired and fired by the commission, just like the attorney, just like the manager. Mocha, you said that they were over a committee, and just to be clear about that, there is an audit committee made up of 5 commissioners appointed by the mayor that oversee the work of the auditor and make recommendations to the mayor and commission about the audit work plan every year and meet regularly with the auditor. I meet with the group as well, and they make recommendations to the mayor and commission, who's the ultimate decision maker, which is consistent with all of our committees.
Okay. Thank you for that information, for that clarity. Does anyone else want to ask any questions? Sherry, could you tell us what you discovered based on the research you did?
Well, so first I just want to say, you guys asked me a lot of questions last meeting, and I think it wasn't clear that some of them you may have wanted additional research. So I apologize for the confusion. When I walked away from the last meeting, the research that I understood you'd asked me to do was to research whether the task force could make a referral for mediation through the 10th district with the ADR options that are there. And I didn't realize that you wanted more information on this, but I think that with both Blaine and I here, and he may be able to, or maybe want to chime in, but I think, what we discussed last week is still true, which is that, there are charter offices. Their roles are governed by the charter itself, which is a little bit more difficult to amend than, actually I'd say a good bit more difficult to amend in some cases than just an ordinance. And then specifically, if we're going to talk about the auditor, Chapter 1-3 of the Code of Athens-Clarke County kind of governs a lot of their responsibilities. So, one of the things we talked about last week is that we're a strong manager form of government, and so a lot of decisions about new entities would lie with Blaine, but they also could lie with the mayor and commission. And so I think you're free to make any recommendation that you like, and then it would be up to the mayor and commission working with the manager to decide what step they think would be most appropriate. And so if they agreed with your recommendation that you wanted this to be under the office of the auditor, then I think it would need to be an ordinance amending the current section 1-3-1 to clarify that this is part of the auditor's responsibilities as a charter officer. If that wasn't the case, I think the other option we discussed would be that it could be under the manager as the other most likely candidate. And then I'm happy to speak to that ADR mediation piece as well. I just don't know if now is the right time to speak to that.
Okay. If no one has any other questions, thank you for that, Clara, for going over it again. Thank you. I appreciate that, Sherry. If no one has any more questions about the power of authorities, and because, we know what the options are, more or less, then we can move on to what you discovered about mediation. So does anyone else want to ask any questions? All right, you can go ahead, Sherry.
Sure. So I looked into the ADR program for the 10th district, and as I kind of expected, it's really designed for the court. So it's available specifically for superior court, magistrate court, I think probate court, pretty much any of your courts who are going to be directing certain cases to mediation, so divorce or complex civil litigation, things like that. I think Leanna did a really fantastic job of kind of outlining what the mediation programs are generally across the country, and looking at them, that's also what I found, just as what Leanna described a few moments ago, that basically a lot of them are in-house, or they're contracting with different experienced certified mediators who can come in and independently work on those. I don't mean to say smaller, because that's not the right word, but as she said, your cases where it is something that would be appropriate for mediation and not something that needs to be investigated on a higher level. And so I think those are absolutely good options, and we could either look into having a program of our own, or contracting with an outside mediator. But the 10th district ADR program, I think it was Joan who mentioned, would not be something that would be available to us.
Okay. Thank you for that information. Does anyone have any questions for Sherry? All right, so we can move on to the next bullet point on the agenda under item B how will the agency effectiveness be measured? So that was a question that we wanted to try to hash out a little bit more, Leanna. How did you guys do it? Like, how do you measure the effectiveness and make sure we're hitting the points and be transparent as well?
Right. And I think that's kind of like the million dollar question, or probably more than $1 million, because there's no a lot of it is just really, we don't actually have, when I say we, as you know, the oversight professionals, we don't have data to support, in a community where you have oversight. Are you, does it, do the complaints go down, or are communities more satisfied with, the relationship between, their law enforcement agency and, how they're serving the community? I really think the effectiveness is, you probably want to write in those responsibilities with respect for the transparency pieces, the reporting, because numbers aren't necessarily going to be everything. Because if the auditor reports, okay, we took in so many cases, or we sent so many cases for mediation, or how many cases, what were the outcomes of the cases that we reviewed from internal affairs, as far as how many did we send back for further investigation if we felt they weren't thorough. I mean, those are all good, I guess you could say, like, benchmarks to measure, how the community is utilizing the office. And I think that it almost kind of takes time, right? Because your first year, when you first set up, the entity is going to have to, become legitimate in the eyes of the community, right? You're going to have to establish that credibility of what it is you're doing. What is the process? What is the feedback to the complainants? So it's going to come with time. The numbers are going to come with time, as far as how many complaints you're taking. Those are all things that you should continue to report. But I think sometimes the effectiveness, the measurability of the effectiveness, sometimes comes in something that you can't measure. It's almost a situation where, okay, if you have, a protest over an incident that and I'm not saying this in any way, shape, or form as far as a negative thing about protests, but I'm saying, if in those protests there are particular incidents that have to be addressed, that the community feels secure in the fact that this oversight entity exists, and they will be part of that review. They will be part of reviewing the complaints. They will be part of seeing, the process that was used to monitor a protest. I'm just throwing out examples here. So, in some respects, it's the level of trust that the community has with the oversight entity. A lot of that also comes with the outreach that the oversight entity does too. So there's not really a measurable outcome, because we don't have that. I mean, that's something that's, you have the oversight entity, how does your community feel about it? I would say oftentimes too, it's, does your community even know that you exist? I've said this on the call a couple of times, that, I've talked to some communities that I've had oversight for 30 years and people don't even know it exists in their communities. So it's going to be measured by, the work, the public reporting piece of the oversight entity, whether that be, the outreach that they do, whether, regular reporting to the elected officials, like maybe on a quarterly basis. I always, as the auditor, met with the city manager on a monthly basis, if not more, as needed, as issues came up, to bring forward issues, but also documenting the change. Like, if you're documenting recommendations that you're making for maybe your complaint intake process, or follow up with complainants, documenting the recommendations and what the outcome of those recommendations were are going to be very important.
Okay. So so I guess in summary, it's more about documenting the progress, or documenting the work that's being done, and the results from the work.
Exactly. Documenting that, and also the visibility of the office, and the work of the office within the community.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Leanne?
I do. I just want to say, I think one way, and Leanna, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you just said it actually, was in the reporting. Right now, we need to decide, as we create this entity, how often we want it to report. So, for example, when I was looking at the Madison ordinance, they report once per year. So we have the option of going once per year. We could go even twice per year, or if I heard you correctly just now, Liana, you said we could even do it 4 times per year. You know, if we do it quarterly. But one way that we might measure the agency's effectiveness, particularly in the beginning, but really even far into the future, is kind of what you mentioned, Madam Chair, earlier about our 13 principles, which are essential to the creation of this position in this board. But I think it's also it's essential to how the agency's effectiveness could be measured. So we could actually request, once we decide how often we want this report to come out, say it's once per year or twice per year, that in the report that they specifically address how are we doing on each of these 13 key principles. And one of those 13 key principles, obviously, is community outreach. Another is community involvement. And to Liana's point, if our community doesn't even know about the existence of this entity, then that's a measurement, right?
Right. So, you know, that is a great idea. I like that. That is a good place for us to start. It's just I felt a little unsafe to not have any type of points to hit to say that this is working and how it is improving the relationship between community and policing and transparency and all the things that we read on the survey, you know? So that will probably be a good place to start.
One other, Madam Chair, one other thing too is that you could actually continue to do surveys with the individuals that are filing complaints. As we did that maybe every other year, we would do a survey. Once the complaint was closed, we would send a small survey form out to the to the complainant, and basically, did the process, was the process explained to you? Did you understand? Regardless of the outcome of the complaint, if it was a sustained or not sustained, just to kind of get a feel for if the complainants felt that they were treated fairly, and that the process itself was easy for them to maneuver, and that they were provided with updates as to the status of their complaint. So you may want to consider a survey, introducing that into the reporting process too.
Okay.
Madam Chair, that Phil actually raised that issue for me, and Liana just actually resolved it beautifully, because my main concern is that that our measure of judgment of successfulness of this board, it be taken with the people that are affected by it, the people that are going to use it. And so when Phil raised that issue, that was the first thing I was thinking is, how can we tap to the community? And if the community doesn't know about it, then that will be a standard of measurement that's not available to us. And as Liana said, if we can track the satisfaction or lack thereof in specific categories of the people that have utilized the board, I think ultimately that's going to be the best measurement of how effective this board is or isn't.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I would also say that, that's one main concern. How does the county have funds to promote and market that this exists to those communities so that they know how to use it, because it's not going to change anything if they don't know it's there.
Right.
So, as far as marketing budget, would that be a issue for this committee or agency?
I think, Madam Chair, I think requesting a marketing budget, I mean, it'll be good on several different fronts. For one, it'll enable us, to empower this board to do what it has to do, but also it'll be a show of goodwill on behalf of the city itself to say that, okay, we will spend the money to let the citizens know that we are putting this board in place to improve community-police relationship and trust. And so I think that, requesting that type of budget would be good on different levels.
Okay. So we could definitely add that into the recommendation. If we get it, we get it. If we don't, we don't. But we can put it in the recommendations.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
May I add something? I mean, it's not really a huge budget that you need for that. I mean, marketing, you can create brochures that you can have some of your community advocacy groups distribute for you at their locations, at the courts, at the libraries, at a lot of the public entities. If you just go and give them, 500 brochures to hand out. But the biggest, that's the most cost-effective way to also do it is, in addition to the brochures, it's going to be what your auditor or your board is actually out there doing with respect to making presentations, going out to community organizations and schools or what have you, and making presentations. And that basically doesn't cost you anything other than you're paying for the salary anyway. But it's nice to have the brochures, to have them out there in the community being distributed.
That's a good idea. Thank you, Leanna. Thank you for sharing that with us. All right. Anybody else want to chime in before we move to the next bullet point? All right. So let me get back here. So the next one is, how will elected officials hold the oversight agency accountable? How is that done where in Tucson, Leanna?
Well, the auditor is evaluated just like any other appointed, official or director of the city with respect to, the criteria on, how are they community operations with the community, how are they managing their budget, so all the stuff that a appointed official normally gets evaluated on. I guess with respect to the auditor, you can also probably put in some of that other criteria, the exact same things that we just talked about. How are you doing outreach? Are you doing, how are you managing, the public view, the public facing part of your office? So I think it's probably two different sets of criteria, whatever the Athens uses to evaluate their appointed staff. But in addition to that, what are the responsibilities of this particular position? And we just talked about that. So you could probably build those into there too. I think, from a personal perspective, I always felt that, I would go before the elected officials kind of on an annual basis in person to their meetings, and kind of give them, in addition to giving them my report, my public report, answered questions and so forth from them. And I think it's going to come with time, but I think that the feedback that I always got from my elected officials was the feeling of, when they got a call about a complaint, they had the ability to, refer that individual to, contact the auditor, or contact the auditor's office. And for them, that was, a way of evaluating me, because if they never got the follow-up call from that citizen or complainant rather, saying that they weren't satisfied that I, addressed their concerns or gave them their options, then they felt I was doing my job, because they were able to, refer them to me, and they knew that it was going to be, addressed. Not always in the way that the complainant may have felt that it was satisfactory, but with respect to the outcome, but at least they were being addressed. So I think that the elected officials will be able to make that level of evaluation very easily, because in the same way, complainants can also, lodge their complaints with elected officials that the auditor's not doing her or his job, because they're not, taking complaints, or not listening to me, or I filed a complaint, I never heard back. So some of it's going to be very kind of anecdotal, or, by kind of word of mouth, but I think you're going to need to do it based on kind of those measures of performance that you would do other appointed officials.
Okay. So when you I'm thinking about, what is it like for who, if somebody's over you and something goes wrong, and because we brought this up last week, right? So who would be the person that you would have to go to be, if there's some type of reprimanded or some type of disagreement? or there was an issue that occurred, who would resolve that issue? Because we're saying, as opposed to one person being able to say, okay, let's get rid of this independent auditor monitor or this person and find a new person to fill this position. Is there any way for it to like go through a process before that happens?
Yeah, I would recommend that you put some kind of process, because although luckily it never happened to me, but I know a lot of peers that has occurred. I will tell you the monitor in New Orleans had that very issue happen, because she actually, it's interesting because her structure is she reported to, they actually have a city auditor, and that's who her reporting structure was to originally. And they had major conflicts of how her office should be run, but her budget and everything was dictated through that structure. And that individual also had the ability to hire and fire her. And because it seemed like it was an immediate personality clash, and just kind of ideology as far as, who she reported to, they took her office out of that structure, but actually wrote into their ordinance that there has to be, before the auditor can be removed, basically they can only be removed for cause, but there has to be like a hearing of, I think it's their ethics board. They have like an ethics board structure there in New Orleans. And so it has to be a hearing before the ethics board before they could make a recommendation to remove the auditor. There's other cities that will appoint the auditor or the oversight executive on like maybe for a 2-year term, or most commonly it's like a 4-year term. And then before their appointment is up for renewal, then it goes to a vote basically of their elected officials, if they are the ones that did the appointment, as to whether or not to renew the contract. But because this person is an appointed position, it's always kind of tricky. I don't know if in your state there's, civil service kind of protections for appointed positions. Usually appointed positions don't have civil service protection, but it is good to take kind of the political influence out of it by creating some kind of a mechanism where you have, some kind of a hearing or presentation. It has to be by vote. It shouldn't necessarily be one person can make that decision.
Okay. All right, so we'll make sure we include that, because that was a question that came up last week, and just trying to, make sure there was something in place so that person couldn't just be let go without any type
Mocha,
of process.
if I could ask, what you would be doing is creating a position that no other of the 1,700 employees would be going through such a process. So I think we're getting really specific on certain things, which is fine, but I don't know. You mentioned who this person may or may not report to. I mean, there's an accountability piece here. We're all accountable to the mayor and commission. The charter officers can be fired. The only delay in their firing is a 24-hour notice for a public meeting to take a vote. This is an at-will state. If we have an employee who's not a charter officer, and Leanna's right. We do have a personnel system that most of our employees fall under. There are, in that case, with the exception of the constitutional officers, if an employee wants to appeal a decision, whether it's disciplinary or termination, they can work their way up the chain through me and ultimately go to the personnel hearing officer, which is an outside attorney who's appointed by the attorney, I believe. So I think we're starting to get a little complicated. And Leanna, I think you're giving good examples, but that's not quite Georgia either. So I would caution you that, we have a totally separate personnel process for this one person. I think ultimately it's whether or not you trust the mayor and commission as your elected officials to hold everybody below them and the government accountable. And if you don't, then that's another issue, I think.
Okay. So Leanna, if you could clarify for me, when you worked at, we're going by the recommendations of these agencies that were previously created and by the expertise. So I'm looking at it, if they were able to do some of these things in other cities, that will be able to make these recommendations. And then it's ultimately up to the mayor and commission to do what is permittable. So Leanna, I wanted to know, were you an independent contractor? Because I believe that's what you said, or were you an employee?
I was an appointed, like any other director, I was an appointed. I gave up my civil service protection to take the position. So basically, I could be terminated at the drop of a hat if they were not satisfied with my performance. But I always, but again, going back to what Mr. Williams is saying, really, it's really the trust in the elected officials that, that they would ultimately, it could be a recommendation from the city manager to the elected officials and maybe do it by vote. But I was always, I was an appointed employee, so I could be removed for cause or for no cause. That's just the way the position was created.
Okay. So does anyone have any other questions? All right, so we can move to, we have about 10 minutes left. We can move to funding mechanism, budget, and discuss and identify a specific and detailed budget estimate. So it might not be detailed, but we had spoke about this probably 2 weeks ago, Leanna. So if you can, again, just repeat, like, what are your recommendations when it comes to funding? And also for the amount that we should recommend when it comes to like the marketing piece and I guess labor, all of that stuff.
Right, and I mean, and so some of this is going to depend what you already have in place, resource-wise. I mean, your biggest funding item is going to be the salary for this individual, and obviously, you're going to probably do it within your established salary structure of, where this individual lays within that, and any support staff as well that you decide is either if it's shared staff. I think we talked a little bit about maybe support staff could be shared. I would say the marketing piece, I never really had more than like $3,000 a year in marketing, in a marketing budget. I don't know how you fund the other tangibles with like the hard cost with, office space. If you already have office space, technology, computers or, software that may be needed. One of the things may be to look into some of the software systems that software technology that's out there to be able to, track some of the complaints. And, you're looking at, software costs from anywhere from, depending on how real that, I mean, on what you really want, obviously anything from $1,000 to $5,000 a year or something for those software, depending on what you use. Most people use that IA Pro. If your police department is always also using something similar, you may be able to be part of that software package or something. So I would say it's, the technology, then your hard costs for your office space, unless you already have, a location where, you've already identified that. But your biggest cost is going to be the salary within your salary requirements for that particular position and any support staff.
Okay, and when it comes to funding mechanism, did all the funding come from the city per se?
Yes, it was all part of the city budget. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Do you have any recommendations for additional outside funding resources for such an entity?
Not that I'm familiar with. I mean, I know that, if you're talking about the mediation program too, you may want to talk about what that costs, especially if you contract some of that out, what that would be, what that would look like. And obviously any kind of printing cost. If you're going to be doing, everybody's doing everything, electronically now anyway. So any kind of reports and everything, you wouldn't even have to print them. You can just do them electronically. So, printing costs and so forth. But outside funding, I don't see, there are some agencies sometimes that get grants for like small projects, like within their states. Denver, for example, got a state grant to do a Kids and Cops program that was funded out of the monitor's office to do some very targeted, specific outreach programs with the youth in their community. But that was a grant that they sought, through at the state level from the governor's office, I believe. But I'm not really familiar with any others that get any outside funding.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else have any questions that we need to make sure that we consider for the budget, such as marketing, labor, office costs, printing, anything else that that you think that we might want to recommend or include, or if you have any questions?
Madam Chair, I would just ask that as we look at the salary amount, say we're looking at one position, that we request some information on what rank in city government, or what salary level would this be tantamount to within the existing municipal salary structures that we have for staff. So that would be an ongoing question I would have.
Well, and Mocha, if I might, Madam Chair, I think y'all are asking some very good questions, and I don't know how far down you want to go with this. Most governments have a position classification system, so the salary is going to be based on a classification system with both internal and external equity that have to do with the knowledge, skills, and abilities required, the responsibilities of the position. So just before certainly we could look to other communities and examples and auditors and that type of thing. It's good, it'll also. So there's just that gets pretty technical. I don't know if this committee wants to get into all that or not, but HR would, once the office is formed and we know what it's going to do and how it's going to go about it, then our HR professionals would analyze it and provide a salary range for it.
You know what? That's a very good point, and I don't want to overstep my bounds because I'm certainly not an HR professional on this. So that is getting a little bit in the weeds. But it would be interesting to see that information, though.
Yeah, and I would agree with Phil as well. But just so you know, Blaine, when we make the recommendations, we're making them to where it's just for you guys to consider these things and to make sure that your whatever classifications within the perimeters that you already have, we're not trying to necessarily, go totally out of the system. We're just trying to make sure that we're hitting all the key points and that we're thinking of everything when we're making this recommendation. And it's ultimately, yet again, up to the mayor and commission to, to consider and do what they need to do to make sure it's appropriate.
Well, I appreciate how thorough y'all are being. I don't want to dissuade you from whatever you want to talk about, investigate. I just didn't want y'all to. I know y'all put a lot of time into this, and some of these things, staff will take care of, and it'll be done in plain sight. So, but thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it for breaking that down and to let us know. So I guess we can move on. We're going to skip over item D, and we're going to talk about that at the town hall meeting that we have. We go over that, recommendations. But in any case, Philip and Sarah, did y'all want to do an update on the draft on the ordinance and what that has been like and what that looks like and where you're at in that process?
Sure, absolutely. I'll start, Sarah, if that's okay. And so we had a chance to dive into this, and Sarah and I have looked very closely at the ordinance of Madison, Wisconsin, which of all the different municipal entities that we looked at, they have the one that most closely matches to what we've been discussing here at our task force. And so this is about a 10-page document, and I worked on it up until about Friday, and then Sarah worked all weekend on it. And then we have basically taken the Madison ordinance, and we figured rather than just completely starting from scratch, we could look at their ordinance, and it really does match up quite well with what we're trying to do. There's a few things that they have that we don't have up there, like a fire and police commission. There were some references to the fire and police commission in there that we need to strike. And as we share this document with you guys, you'll see some of that. And then there were some other things that we want to look closely at, like when forming the membership of the board. If you're in Madison, Wisconsin, for example, they have a different type of diversity of population than we do. So they were recommending at least one African-American member, one LGBTQ person, and so forth. Obviously, our numbers would be a little different. We would want, I would think, more than just one African-American member. So that's something, as we were going through this, we figured there's still a few questions we have that we want to get answered by this group. But I was really very pleased, and I'll let Sarah speak to it, Sarah Shannon speak to it as well, that in looking at it, really, I would say probably 90% of the language in the Madison ordinance is quite usable and applicable to what we're trying to do here in Athens-Clarke County. And one of the things that I did too is at the beginning, I was trying to grapple to exactly, when we finish our work, what will our report look like? And I assume it'll be, in the form of both a report and a sample ordinance, because the ordinance really, puts into writing what we're trying to do. But so I guess there's two things we're working on, both the report, and the ordinance. And in the report, I wanted to make sure that we included the 13 key principles, which every time I got back to anything, I could always look back to the key principles. But I think, Madam Chair, after Sarah Shannon speaks, one thing we can do in the future is to share this document, and all of these great questions that we're asking, we can then, refer back to this 10 or 11 page document, this ordinance, and say, okay, we want this to do X. Where in this document does it say we're going to do X, right? And I think that might be kind of a productive way to do it. But that's just a suggestion. But Sarah, Sarah Shannon, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think what you just said is really important. I think a fruitful next step would be for other members of this task force to take a look at the wording in that ordinance. There are a couple of things that you flagged in there, Phil, around, like you said, the composition of the board, but also at our last meeting, we were discussing compensation, and there's a spot in there for us to get specific about our recommendations there. So I do think everyone having a chance to look at this draft will help move our conversation forward in a helpful way.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. I know it's been a lot of work for you guys to do that and to take time out. So we are truly appreciate it. So after this meeting, if you could share it with everyone in the group, I think Sarah George might have shared it with the task force members already, maybe. But if not, that would be our homework assignment, is to take the time and to look through that, look through the ordinance and to see the work that's done and to just be prepared to have.
Yes, and Madam Chair, I would also be specifically interested in hearing what Sarah George would have to say, because again, we're looking at a city in a different state, and I want to make sure that the language we're using, is correct. So I'm eager for a Georgia attorney to take a look at this verbiage.
Okay. I think that'd be Sherry, or that would probably be Sherry taking a look at it, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. I keep getting Sarah and Sherry mixed up.
I know, right?
Thank you for correcting that. Thank you, Sherry Hines.
Okay, so that would be our homework assignment. We're going to look at it or send it to the attorney and take it from there. So if the last topic on the agenda is to discuss the town hall, so next. So
Mocha,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, real quick, just before you leave that. And I just want to, Madison is similar to us in many ways, but I think they are a strong mayor form of government. So as you look through the ordinance, it's going to be a different level of accountability oversight, going back to some of your questions earlier. So it may not be a total transfer. So please keep that in mind. Thank you, Mocha. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. I guess that's where Sherry would come in. So then you could see that based on the current differences in the structural approach and try to, make it more customizable to Athens.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we're going to have our town hall next week. We're going to open it up and to the public to let them know what we are doing and to get the public feedback before we make our final recommendations. We have decided we want a hybrid model, an auditor-monitor review model. I'm going to put together all the notes, all the summary, the things that we have talked about, and share it with the group as well before next week town hall. but the goal is to answer the questions that Mayor Girtz originally tasked us in the beginning. So that's how we're going to move through the town hall, by answering each question that Mayor Girtz requested us to, to answer, to respond to. And then open it up to the general public so that they have any questions or feedback, because the main thing is that we want community support. We want everyone to feel good about this. We know everybody's not going to feel good about it, but we want majority of the people to feel good about it and do our best to make it work.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Okay. This is Shane. Can you hear me? It's not showing as unmuted.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Time frame. Being that we have not had time to review the document that we will recommend to the Mayor and Commission for approval, may next week be a bit soon, and that we all want to be completely clear on what it is that we're recommending and making sure that everyone is on board with the document. Should we not push it out maybe a week or so that we can get the final recommendation draft down, and so that the board can review it to make sure we're all on the same page, and then carry it forth to the community maybe?
I think that's a good idea. I mean, if you want to push it out for another week or two to give everybody time, just, everybody know that we're not going to be able to make this recommendation. We'll probably be finished with all of this by the end of October, if everybody's okay with that. So we probably have, if we push it out, we have probably about 3 more meetings of getting together. So next week, what we can do is review the recommendations and also give feedback on the ordinance. Do that portion of it, and then do the town hall, if everybody is okay with that.
I think that sounds much more reasonable. I think reviewing a summary, like you said, and then everyone has a chance to review the ordinance next week. That would be much better than trying to rush a town hall next week.
Okay, so that sounds good to me. All right, so that's what we'll do. Are we okay for closing out, Shane? And do we have to make any motions to amend the town hall meeting or anything like that for the following week?
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Did we actually vote on the time for the town hall? I don't believe so. And if not, then we're okay still.
Okay, good. All right, so I would like to make a motion for us to close out our meeting. Does anyone want to second that?
I'll second your motion of adjournment.
All right, so if everyone agrees, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays, say nay. All right, so the ayes have it, and we will close out and meet again next week, Wednesday.
All righty.
Thank y'all so much.
Have a good week. Thank y'all.
Good
Bye, everyone.
meeting.
Have a good week.
Bye, everyone.